welcome to another episode of Being What the Messed Up Counselor. Today's subject is not an easy one, but it is one that comes up many times in the counselling. But I do need to warn you in advance that we're going to be talking about death and dying and loss. So if that's something you're currently going through, or you have some kind of awkwardness with at the moment, then please be very careful watching this video, because it may trigger some things in you. So when we look at loss and when we look at situations of people, any loss really, not just loss whereby somebody's died or passed over, loss where you could have lost a job or you could have lost a relationship, then loss has a very unique process for most of us. There might be some similarities, but it will be a different process for each individual. Some people can cope with it, some people can't, and depend on the type of loss, will depend on whether or not you feel comfortable with it or not. And also, as you're working with loss, you realise that every loss has a process of change. Something changes with loss. And how that works is if we're in charge of the loss, so if we have made a decision to change our life or change our job or change our relationship, something that we have decided and we're in control of and making that decision, it's a different process to loss where somebody would feel out of control and this has been done to me, I had no choice. Both things incur loss, but one because we've been in control of it, we've made the decisions. That helps us to move forward much quicker. Whereas if it's something that's happened to us, we've not made the decision, then it's a much more of a shock, much more of trauma in a lot of cases, and how we work with that is very, very different with each individual, as I've said. When we work with loss, we try to make sure that the person feels okay to actually work with it. There used to be, when I first started, an idea, a kind of a framework, that we wouldn't work with loss if we're working with loss whereby somebody had lost somebody. There's not a 6 weeks or an 8 weeks or a 10 weeks kind of gap between the loss occurring and the therapy starting. Now that's not as rigid nowadays as it used to be, because everybody's an individual, and for some people they need that support straight away, some people don't, and it can work for different reasons. If you're the organiser, for example, if somebody had died in the family or close to you, and you're the one that's active and you're the one that gets things done, you're a good administrator, you're a good finisher, completer, you've got the energy to make those things happen, then whilst that loss is going through with other people around you, because they're not doing some of that work, they don't have a very busy aspect, they've got time to think and to dwell on things, then they're going to be going through a loss process earlier than you, possibly. Because if you've been busy, you're organising, you're working through the process of getting things done, and then once that's completed, you then have time, you then are able to look back and reflect, then that might mean that you need that 2, 3, 4 months before you come to that time when it's the right time for you. Now that's really hard for the people around you that are different, as I've said, because they won't understand why you're doing it your way, because it's different to how they do it. So they may not have that patience, they may not have that energy to just allow those differences. And certainly where somebody has died, it really does become more of the processing of their house, their belongings, their kind of like aspects of their life the kind of solid stuff that they've got that needs to be sorted, needs to be done. But sometimes that can be the focus, and other people are going through a really emotional kind of trauma event, and they don't want to think about these things. They don't want to contemplate getting rid of things or kind of selling things and those kind of things, because to them, they're still in the emotional turmoil. Which is why I say it's really different for everybody. No two people will ever go through it the same way. When we're working with it, we have to think about these things first. We have to think, is it the right time? And how do we, me and the client, or clients, work through that process? What is it they want from us now at this moment in time? It might be that they don't want to do any therapeutic work as such moving forward. It might be that they just want space to reflect, to talk, to share. And sometimes that can be from a few sessions. Before then they get into a place where they feel it's the right time for them to start processing the loss fully. And sometimes, you'll have situations where people just come and cry in the room with you as a therapist. And that's okay. Nothing wrong in that. Crying's good. But it might be that they just can't deal with their feelings and emotions of what's going on. One of the major ones, certainly where people have passed over and died, is anger. Now, anger is a normal human emotion. What we do with anger means it's okay or it's not okay. But being angry isn't wrong. Being angry is part of being a human being for most people. So the anger is really hard because it's inappropriate, maybe. It's not respectful, maybe, and that's how you feel about it or see it. But it is part of the process of loss. And that anger can sometimes we internalize it because it's not healthy and it might be disrespectful to other people around you. That anger can't come out, can't be processed. So within the therapy process, we obviously can deal with that. We can look at it and work with it quite naturally. As we move through the process of loss, and as I say, depend on how that loss has occurred, then there's ways of doing that each therapist will have their own ways of doing it. But generally speaking, it'll be a case of looking back, seeing the relationship, coming to terms with that process, that person is no longer there, or that job is no longer there, or that relationship is no longer there. They're all losses. And coming to terms with that and trying to get a sense of there is a future, there is something that I can do, I can take control of, I can make happen, and processing that forward. A great majority of our therapeutic work will be around loss in one sense or another, and in that wider context. And it comes in many forms. You can have the loss of health. Somebody has some health issues and they no longer can do what they used to do, maybe. So there's a loss there, a loss of strength, ability, life, whatever. There can be a loss of work, a loss of kind of a job, focus. There can be retirement, big loss for a lot of people. If you've not processed it, got ready for it, and made it a thing that you're in charge of, you're in control of. There's a loss of a relationship, which can be really hard because the relationship partner might be the mum or dad to the kids, and then there's even more loss because you've got the loss of not just one relationship, but a part loss of other relationships. So loss is not an easy one for us, I've found. And different cultures do it differently, obviously. For some cultures, it's a very immediate process, within 2, 3, 4 days. For some people, it's not an immediate process and can't be because maybe they have to have some kind of examination of the body, trying to work out what happened, all those kind of things. So for some people, it's 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, depending on people's time, the kind of structures that we have to incur, cemeteries, timetables, people that are in that queuing system, if you like. So it's not something that you can say, this is what it's going to be and that's how it's going to be and I'm in charge and control of. There are many facets to it, many aspects to it that you won't be in charge of and you won't be in control of. Now, if you've had losses before, then you might have become a bit more resilient, a bit more able to cope. But if it's the first loss you've encountered, or the first close loss you've encountered, then that might take you a while to even consider moving on in life and doing something. So when we're going through these things with people around us, people who care about us, presumably, and love us, and how many people there are, if we're on our own, there's just us, or if there's a family unit around us, those things can make a big difference. But it really means that we have to be able to talk, share our feelings and emotions around loss, around what's happened. Now, as I said, if we were in charge of the loss and we made the choice, like a relationship that we've left or a job that we've left, that isn't going to be such a big deal for you because you've had time to think about it, time to prepare yourself. You've taken the action, you've made the choice and decision. So it's what you want, basically. But if that loss is incurred by other means and we haven't been in charge, we haven't been on control, we have been made redundant or somebody close to us has died, then as I've said, that'll be a whole different experience. I try as much as possible to work with the clients and clients' speed of what they want and when they want it. And it's not an easy process to sit with because most human beings have experienced loss at some time or another. So we have some own experiential learning from that process. And that might trigger us when our clients are talking about those kind of processes of loss. So it might be hard for us. There used to be a kind of a general guidance, or if you, as a therapist, were going through a loss or some kind of endings, then we would take time out from any work around loss and endings. And I don't think that's as much a hard and fast rule nowadays as it used to be in the early days when I first started. So you do need to be your own kind of working with that, understanding that, and seeing where you are in it to try and take a view of, am I okay, am I not okay? The problem with anything that we work with, sometimes when the client walks through the door in the initial stages, they're not working with those things. But then as the therapy works, then either it comes out or they may encounter a loss whilst they're in the process of therapy. So sometimes you can't manage that as easy because naturally if you're working with a client and you've got that relationship and they're really being helped and they trust you and they value your work, then it's going to be hard for you to say, actually, I really can't do this. And that's not an easy one for anybody because looking at your own needs over the client's needs is not usually what we do. We look at the client's needs over our needs. And it's that wanting to help, wanting to make somebody okay kind of process. I always advocate with the supervisees that I talk to around these subject matters that they engage the supervisor in the conversation because the supervisor is external. They should know the supervisee if they've been working with them for a while, and they can be objective in that process, more so than the counsellor or the therapist. So it is really helpful to talk to somebody about this, and your supervisor obviously would be the main person to do so. As we're working with that, and hopefully there isn't any triggers for us, hopefully we are aware of what we can cope with, what we can't cope with. The client sometimes gets to, and certainly if there's nobody else in their world to encounter this kind of conversation, this communication around loss, then sometimes they can become too close to us, too needy of our time and our energy and our attention. And that's not good or bad. That's not them being a bad client or us being a bad therapist. That's sometimes just how that relationship process can work. But we do need to be mindful of that. We need to be constantly thinking, is this the right structure? Are we working in the right way? Are we giving up too many of our boundaries? Is the client getting dependent on us? Are they contacting us between sessions? Are they kind of pushing the boundaries of our professional connection? All those things give us heads up that there might be something going on. There might not be. But again, it's good to talk to your supervisor about that and work that process. It's a big subject, and as I said at the beginning, it's not an easy one to talk about, even with therapists, because we never know where those triggers might occur. But if you can have that conversation with your supervisor and your people, if you're a therapist or a counsellor, and if you're a client and you're going through some form of loss that you've not been in charge of or in control of, then again, find some way of communicating with somebody. Find some way of talking things out. Don't internalise. The problem for a lot of people is if they're the organiser of, say, the funeral and the kind of the ending of that person's life, the kind of official bits, if you like, the legal stuff, then when they become clear of that, then they want to do their own grieving. But the other people around them in the family have probably already grieved to a certain degree. So then they get that feeling of, well, I can't do that now because I'll be upsetting these people again because they're getting through it. And that can be a really hard one, which is why obviously counselling works, because we aren't involved in their world and their life. They don't have to feel guilty about telling us or worried about how it's going to affect us. As I've said, it's a really big one, that one, and one that all human beings have to go through, I'm afraid, at some time or another. Sometimes we don't talk about these things, quite naturally, as we've said, and sometimes we need to make other people aware, which isn't easy. But if we can bring people into that conversation that we trust and we value and we respect, and they respect us, obviously, then that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, does actually come true. It's good to talk, it's good to share with people who you trust. So if you're thinking about this, what we've done today and what I've talked about, be careful who you share it with, dependent on their situation. Certainly if it's somebody who's going through a bereavement or a loss. But if you can share it, if it feels okay to share it, then the kind of things I've talked about and looked at and explored in this short kind of 20 minutes, then that might help them to think about it and see it differently, or might help them to process it differently. So hit the like, subscribe, share, and hopefully the losses we incur will be ones that we can process and cope with. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care and enjoy your life.